Welcome to the podcast. And heading into the Christmas season, I want to discuss 4 books that you can go and get yourself for Christmas, or those individuals in your life that are just interested in expanding their educational intuitiveness when it comes to things like politics and economics and whatnot. But before we get into those 4 specific books, there's just a little bit of groundwork that I want to lay. There's a few things that I want to kind of point back to as we begin to, kind of launch forward into some of these books. Number 1, if you go back and listen to the Gatekeeping podcast episode, that podcast episode is important for a few different reasons. Number 1, it highlights the fact that gatekeeping is not the same as it was. Now, instead of just withholding information completely, what we end up doing is burying it in a barrage of nonsense and then, of course, propaganda, so that you have to really sift through, and it makes it very difficult for you to find. It's not impossible. It just means that a lot of effort needs to be put into it. And unfortunately, the vast majority of Americans seem to be asleep at the wheel sometimes. They don't want to take the time, if you will, to kind of, deep dive into this and find out what's going on. Number 2, once you understand that you can get past gatekeeping, you need to understand that there are actual people out there, educated, intentional individuals who actively think about things differently. This is where I want you to focus on. They think about things, quote unquote, differently than some of your more mainstream people that seem to be parroting the same talking points. The ones that are like diehard, avid corporatism believers, because quite frankly, that's what we have today. We don't have the free market capitalism that, first off, doesn't exist. We'll get into that later. But we don't have the capitalism that we had in post-World War II, like the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, even into part of the 70s. We don't have that anymore. It doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that we can't have that back. It just means that it has morphed into something where you have corporations that have effectively, made capitalism all about them and not the American people. So that's point number 2. And point number 3, you need to also understand that when you read books like these, or anything, when you consume a podcast, when you watch a YouTube video, it doesn't really matter what it happens to be. The second that it kind of, let's say, strays away from the narrative that we want you to accept, we're going to automatically slander that person or that organization or whatever. And I'll give you a great example. When it comes to economics, if you are not a diehard, rabid supporter of capitalism to the degree and let's say, the way capitalism is currently, as if it could be as if it cannot be something else, it must be what we have today, then the way to shut down debate is they'll just say, oh, you must be a socialist. You might have a genuine critique, as I will kind of articulate in some of these books. You might have a genuine point. You might have a lot of different points that are worth actually looking into. But instead of actually engaging in the conversation, we'll just shut down debate and say, oh, you must be a socialist. You must be a Marxist, or maybe you're a communist, or X, Y, and Z, whatever they want to say. This happens in every subject that you can possibly think about. It doesn't matter if it's something from an entertainment perspective. It doesn't matter if it's an educational, inspirational leader. It doesn't matter. Pick your topic. So with those 3 things in mind, with the fact that gatekeeping is done a different way and we bury information with nonsense and propaganda, with the fact that there are actual people out there who disagree with what is parroted in the norm. And then when you get into the discussions, that there are people that automatically want to silence you right out the gate because they don't want any dissension at all. And if we do have dissension, we must label them and smear them. With those 3 things in mind, this is what I want to lay the foundation for, to now explore what these, let's say, 4 books happen to be. Now, the first book is this one right here. This book is called, for those of you who are listening, I'll read it off. It's called Managing in the Next Society by Peter Drucker. Now, Peter Drucker, I first came across Peter Drucker's name in a John Maxwell book, which he talks extensively on leadership. But Peter Drucker is commonly referred to as the father of modern management. Peter Drucker was born in 1909 and he died in 2005. He was 95 years old when he passed away. He was around in Europe because he was born in Austria. So he was around in Europe during the rise of what we'll say is fascism. And a lot of that he equates to, hey, I was there watching. I was in the finance sector, kind of looking around, and I could see that the widening gulf of inequality was going to consume the country and indeed all of Europe. And it turns out I happened to be right. And so I was intrigued when I found this particular book in a used bookstore called Peter Drucker, Managing in the Next Society. And there's a lot to like about this book. So let me read you one of the more interesting parts of this book, just a little snippet to whet your appetite that I found interesting. The interviewer asked, quote, "Of late, some of capitalism's biggest boosters, people such as yourself and the financier George Soros, have become its biggest critics. What is your critique?" End quote. And here's Peter Drucker's answer, quote, "I am for the free market, even though it doesn't work too well. Nothing else works at all. But I have serious reservations about capitalism as a system because it idolizes economics as the be-all and end-all of life. It is one-dimensional. For example, I have often advised managers that a 20-to-1 salary ratio is the limit beyond which they cannot go if they don't want resentment and falling morale to hit their companies. I worried back in the 1930s that the great inequality generated by the Industrial Revolution would result in so much despair that something like fascism would take hold. Unfortunately, I was right. Today, I believe it is socially and morally unforgivable when managers reap huge profits for themselves but fire workers. As societies, we will pay a heavy price for the contempt this generates among the middle managers and workers. In short, whole dimensions of what it means to be a human being and treated as one are not incorporated into the economic calculus of capitalism. For such a myopic system to dominate other aspects of life is not good for any society. End quote. There's much more to this conversation and this entire book at all, but he hits the nail directly on the head here. And what he is kind of alluding to, if you will, is a value system that we're valuing or worshiping to some degree an economic model, and we don't care about the human calculus. We don't care about human beings in general. And as Peter Drucker so rightly has understood in this book, Managing in the Next Society, we have a serious problem, and we're going to reap what we sow as a society. And he's 100% right. I have used that particular section right there in multiple articles over at thewealthyironworker.com. And if you like to read, and you happen to be catching this podcast episode, then I would say go on over to the website, go ahead and subscribe, check your email because it's going to send you a verification email to make sure that you get notifications when I produce any kind of content over there. It's not spam, not clickbait. It's not full of ads. It's just good substantive content. And many of the articles, including the book review for this actual book, Managing in the Next Society by Peter Drucker, is on that website. So that's book number one. I'm going to go, eventually and get more Peter Drucker books, but that first one is top notch. This is my first one from him. And, unfortunately he has passed on now, but I mean, he advised C-suite, individuals, entire C-suites for Fortune 500 companies about modern management. And they would take some of what he listened. And of course, obviously the human calculus nature of human beings and what we're doing with capitalism, they didn't listen to ultimately, right? Now, the second book, I found this book in a used bookstore and I was not even looking for it, but I'm glad I found it. And it is called 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism by Ha-Joon Chang. Now, Ha-Joon Chang is a South Korean economist who has since moved to Great Britain and where he teaches at the University of Cambridge, according to the back of this book. Now, when I first found this book, I will tell you now that if you want your eyes opened about some of the things that are peddled, that are often parroted and talked about from a pro-capitalism perspective, I'm not saying that I'm anti, by the way. Let me make sure that I clear the air real fast. I am very much like Peter Drucker. I believe that capitalism works. It has problems. It needs to be regulated because we need to take in the human calculus of this. But in the end, I am very much pro-capitalism. The best weapon against organized greed is organized labor. It's organized people coming together to fight against it. And part of that, let's say, process to getting people to become organized is to also to get them educated and open their eyes and mind to exactly what is wrong and going on and how they can sit here. And once your eyes are opened, you can only solve a problem if you, number one, acknowledge it, and number two, understand it. The level and degree with which you understand a problem is the level and degree with which you will solve it. And so when we start talking about things like 23 things they don't tell you about capitalism, you just need to understand some of the deficiencies of what people are talking about. And the very first thing that he does in this book is he sets the record straight and says, there is no such thing as the free market. The free market doesn't exist. And here's how you can quantify that. The minute that you put any restriction at all, and I mean any restriction at all, the second that you say no child labor, the second that you say we're going to have an 8-hour workday, we're going to have overtime after 40, you're going to have weekends, there's going to be holidays, etc. You do not have a free market. It does not exist. And so when you understand that there is no such thing as the free market, then what you are able to do then is to grasp this concept that not only does it not exist, but now read between the lines when individuals say, I don't want this piece of legislation being passed or that legislation, I want that particular piece passed. Why? Why do you want this one and not this one? And the rhetoric is typically, well, because it's in defense of the free market. No, it doesn't exist. So I need to read between the lines, as it were, and understand why you want a specific piece of legislation. Is it because it makes it easier for you to make money? Well, if it is somebody else getting exploited, or are somebody's protections getting taken away? Interesting. So, and that's the first thing he says in this book, 23 Things That They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. There is no such thing as the free market. And he even gives an example. In that specific chapter, because he's laying groundwork, he talks about the cotton mills back in 1819, 1820 in England and how dangerous they were and how Parliament was considering a ban on kids up to the age of 9. Like you couldn't go into cotton mills and work at all. And if you were 10 to 16, that you could work a maximum of 12 hours a day. That's all you could work. Now, this is laughable to us. We're thinking about this and we hear this and we go, well, that's pretty funny. Yeah, it is, because children in dangerous environments like that was the norm back then. And you know what happened to that particular piece of legislation? It was shelved. They put it off to the shelf and put it off to the side and tabled it because it was seen to interfere with the quote unquote free market. I want the free market. I want all of that stuff to continue rolling. If individuals who are quote unquote in defense of the free market if they were honest with themselves, a lot of them would tell you that they would prefer to roll back all those legislation. And if you want a real significant indication of this, all you have to do is look at, there are various states that are looking to pass laws that allow 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds. And not only do they get to work, but we want them to work longer during the day when, they should be doing some other things. It's a pretty sneaky way, if you will, to try and begin to roll back protections. So when you understand there's no such thing as the free market, that Ha-Joon Chang points out in 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, it begins to open your mind as to what's really taking place. And, here's where I would say the rubber meets the road. You begin to understand that, guess what? It just doesn't have to be the way that it is today. That's it. That's it. It does not have to be the way it is today. There's actually a different way to do things. That's an interesting thought. So that's book number 2, 23 things they don't tell you about capitalism. Book number 3, Capitalist Arise by Peter Drucker. Now, this book here, this book was referenced in another book, and I said, I'm going to go ahead and pick this up. And I'm pretty sure I ordered it off of Amazon. Written in 2017. Peter Georgescu is an individual who is, would say he's a capitalist individual. But here is how he opens his book. The first line of this says, and I quote, "For the past 4 decades, capitalism has been slowly committing suicide." Let me read that one more time so that you understand that. For the past 4 decades, capitalism has been slowly committing suicide. Interesting. Very interesting. And the rest of this book, he details what he believes is going on in the capitalistic market that we've got, which is really more of a corporatist market. And you understand that what he's talking about is saying how the market has been twisted and manipulated to basically siphon. And it'll be a good segue into the next book. But what happens is you have a corporatism market that works for corporations and the very wealthy, and you have wage, even though productivity is skyrocketed, you have wage stagnation for the vast majority of American workers. Interesting book. There's a lot to unpack in here. And also what he talks about, and what I find very interesting, is his discussion with various, there's a couple of different people that he talks about in here. One particular one is a CEO. I mean, there's more than that, but this one CEO, we start talking, the CEO recognizes the issues and sees the writing on the wall for what's going on and all this other stuff. But guess what? He says something to the effect, and I'll paraphrase, but he has to answer to stockholders who are only concerned with the stock returns and nothing else. And so really quick in this book, so I can kind of explain it a little bit better, is that every stockholder is a stakeholder, but not every stakeholder is a stockholder. What that means then is this: I, as an employee of a company, you as a customer of a company, and management in that company, we all have a stake in this company's success. So I'm a stakeholder in that regard. Well, so are the stockholders. But just because I'm a stakeholder as an employee doesn't mean I own stock in this company. And so the stockholders, they want this is where the really difficult part comes in from the financial perspective, because they don't care about a company's longevity. All they care about are the next quarter's profits. That's it. Peter Drucker, in that first book, Managing in the Next Society, also talks about that. He says it's literally impossible. I've worked in finance. It's literally impossible to get these goons to really think about longevity and long term. They don't care. So in that regard, they are the worst stakeholder because they don't care if a company survives. Whereas the employees, the customers, middle management, upper management for that matter, they all have a vested interest in the success and long-term security in long-term longevity of this company, because we want to see it succeed. Indeed, a great example of this, to really kind of encapsulate this book, we begin to talk about someone like Jim Sinegal, who was the former CEO of Costco. And out of all of the accusations and the things that could be leveled at Jim Sinegal, it came from Wall Street. It didn't come from employees. It didn't come from customers. It didn't come from any of the management. It came from stockholders who said it's better to be an employee at that company or a customer than it was to be a stockholder. And even Jim Sinegal was like, they're looking for next quarter. I'm looking for next 25 years. I'm looking for the next 50 years. I'm looking to build a long-term company. And that's where the corporatist idea has kind of come back full circle, just completely taking over the post-World War II time frame, and not capitalism per se, and has completely mutated it into what it is today. And it's very unfortunate, but that's where we're at. Last book on the list of 4 that I think deserve their place on your bookshelf is People, Power, and Profits by Joseph Stiglitz. In this book, you may have heard me mention a few different concepts that I'll explain, but I got them out of this book, and they really genuinely make a whole lot of sense when you, let's say, pull the wool off your eyes and begin to take a nice long look around. What happens is, what he basically outlines in this book, there's a whole lot to like about this book, but a couple of different things that I find really intriguing. Number one, I got the concept of wealth creation as opposed to wealth extraction out of this book. In other words, the post-World War II economy, right? The golden age of capitalism, if you will. This was all about wealth creation. We were creating wealth, and the middle class, about 1 in 3 were represented by a union. Now it's 1 in 10. So the decline in unionism as corporatism and globalization began to take place, you began to see the decline in unionism, and you began to see a decline in the middle class. 100%, the correlation is there. So what we have transformed into, if you will, is an economy where we're not necessarily focused so much about wealth creation as we are wealth extraction. And one really clear principle that drives this point home is the term rent seeking. Rent seeking, aptly named, is a concept in economics where I'm not really creating any wealth. I want more money. That's exactly what's going on in the American single-family home and the home crisis anyway, when we have these issues of coming from starting to talk about all the home issues, and big finance is buying them out. Why? So they could turn around and rent them out to a lot of Americans, make a ton of money. You're not creating any wealth. It's rent-seeking behavior, and it's exploding. And that's what he's talking about. This idea that we don't have wealth creation so much as we have wealth extraction anymore. How do we extract money out of the middle class? We're siphoning money off the bottom and filtering it up to the top. And this has been a topic of discussion for 30 years. Here you have this book from Peter Drucker that I mentioned, the first one. It was published in like 2002, and it was it's probably that particular excerpt that I read this book here. That book there was a compilation of things, and so it's probably from something older than that. And people have been talking about the significant issues of capitalism, or corporatism as it is morphed into today. We don't have wealth creation. We have wealth extraction. And the last major point that I'll bring up, and it's more towards the end because he basically spells it out. But what he says is we have our values are wrong. And here's what I mean. We have an economic model that what the American people exist to do is to prop up this economic model. Indeed, the citizens of the world exist to prop up this economic model. And instead, what we need is an economic model that serves the people. And since I live in America, that's the country that I'm going to talk about. Whatever country you might listen to this podcast in, that's what you need. You need an economic model that serves the people of your country, not that your people in your country exist to serve that economic model. And this is what he was talking about in this book. And to give you a clear example of this, Pat Buchanan, politician widely known in the 90s, and then Ross Perot, who also ran for president when Bill Clinton and George Bush were running. I think it was the second time. But NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, was signed into law by Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot and Pat Buchanan were opposed to it. Ross Perot said it's going to be like a vacuum because you're going to see the gutting of the middle class. He was exactly right. Pat Buchanan also denounced NAFTA and had Milton Friedman, who is like the economist god, who individuals who are pro-corporatist. Milton Friedman called Pat Buchanan, and Pat Buchanan said, he told him, "You're doing the devil's work in supporting or in opposing NAFTA and opposing free market capitalism," as he called it. Said he was doing the devil's work. I don't know about you, but that sounds like somebody who worships an economic model as opposed to what is going to be ultimately good for the American people. And so there you have what I believe are 4 books going into 2026 that if you don't have on your shelf, that you should get and you should read and you should underline and you should highlight and you should think and you should discuss and understand that although it seems like all the talking heads seem to prefer the economic model that we've got today with this corporatism that's jacked up, it doesn't have to be this way. And there are individuals who think differently than them. Lastly, I'll also highlight that there are actual economists who disagree with them as well. Angus Deaton is an economist who, for a long time during his career, he was applauding, if you will, the demise of unions. He has since changed his tune because he sees how the economy does not seem to be working for a vast majority of people, and recognizes the contributions and, quite frankly, the checks that unionism brings. It adds a voice to the collective. And if you really dissect all 4 of these books down, all 4 of them that I have in my hand right here that are on my shelf and that should be on yours as well, then what you come to find out is that in some of these books, they do actually talk about unions and the benefit and the voice and the seat at the table, if you will. They advocate for that. And so if you are looking to have this muscle right here, your brain, to think some more and to just understand some things and to realize that it doesn't have to be this way, and see that there's educated individuals who have a vested interest in a different way of doing things, we need to highlight some of these 4 books should be on your shelf. And so that concludes this podcast episode. I'm glad you took the time to listen to it. If you liked it, go ahead and share it, leave a comment. If you want to talk to me, you can go over to thewealthyironworker.com to the contact page, fill it out. I'll see your email and I'll respond accordingly. Thanks for listening, y'all. And I'll see you on the next one.